Hello again, everybody, and welcome to Breakout C1 in Conversation, Changemakers, Business Strategy, and Food System Transformation. This is a panel discussion, so feel free to put any questions in the chat. Our panelists will get to those and we'll have a great discussion as a group. I'll give you all just a couple seconds to get in here. I know you were probably having a lot of fun networking. We have a great group of panelists here joining us, Peter Hoffman and Julie Kunin, as well as Michael Bacher, who will be moderating again. And it looks like everybody's starting to join in here. So with that, I would like to welcome our moderator back to the stage, Michael Bacher, who is Vice President for Global Workplace Programs at Google.
Hi, Michael. Thanks, Debbie. It's great to be back again. We're going to have a great conversation with two change leaders in the broader industry as well. And we're going to talk about what changes in the broader food system and how might you affect change as well. So I would like to welcome on the stage Julie Kunin, who is presently the Director of Sustainability at Oatley for North America. Julie, welcome to the stage.
Hey, Michael. Nice to be here.
As well, Peter Hoffman. Peter is a recovering restaurateur, and I have to ask him about that.
Mm-hmm.
What do you mean with that?
Right. Well, I ran a restaurant for 26 years and came to the end of my time doing that in terms of it being a challenge. And so I've spent the last 4 years writing this book that we'll talk a little bit more about. But as I said, it took its toll. So I'm fully recovered now, I think. But in the way that 12-steppers talk about things, I don't think I'm going back off the wagon forever in terms of restaurant ownership.
Got it. More about the book shortly as well. But I think for the audience today, I want to maybe start with your journey so far, because I think, Julie, you have actually been, I might say, all over the place. You've done all kinds of interesting stuff. So do you want to walk us through all the things you have done that led you to your present role?
I will do that in as lightning fast speed as possible. Otherwise, we're going to be here for a while. I started out in academia, and I actually studied archaeology and anthropology. I have a PhD in Mayan archaeology. And at the time, thought I was going to take the academic track. But my focus in that study was the intersection of people and their environment. And I studied ancient agricultural strategies, not knowing that at the end of it, 20 years later, I would be working in food. But that has always been this theme that's been running through my work, is sort of this connection between people, the place that they live in, and the environment that they're in, and therefore, of course, the food that they eat. I feel like I've attacked that sort of question and challenge from a lot of different perspectives. So from academia, I went into the federal government and worked in international development policy for many years, after which I sort of thought, okay, I'm sort of done at this big high level. I want to get down into the programmatic granularity. So I went to an environmental nonprofit and ran conservation strategy and programs for a while. Then I thought, okay, I've done that. I'd really like to work directly with chefs and restaurants on the issue of sustainability and food. And I'd also like to be a journalist and kind of indulge a little bit more in creative, non-scientific writing about what I'm observing, because I had a fairly unique perspective. So people, culture, the environment. So I've written quite a number of magazine articles that are meant to be accessible for people. And at the end of all of that, I thought to myself, and this is my personal philosophy, that the economy drives the world, people's consumption choices drive the world, and people's pleasures really drive the world. And I thought, I think I can maybe have the impact that I'm looking for if I go inside the beast. If I go inside a company that is mission driven, but that is ultimately making products that people crave and want, and use that as the lever of change towards sustainability. So that's how I ended up at Oatley.
I'm going to come back to you about what changes you want to make through Oatley. Peter. Back 40, the Savoy restaurant, those are probably the ones that you spend a lot of time in and with.
Yeah.
But I think besides owning two great restaurants in New York City, you were heavily involved as well in the Chefs Collaborative. Could you speak a little bit about your journey to ultimately becoming a writer as well? We have two writers on the panel today.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, I think, and we'll get into other parts of this later with, but I think that I always understood that I was a citizen of the planet first, and a restaurateur or a business person second. And so what that meant is that I was searching for ways of being a global citizen through my business. So how do I take my my leave no trace approach as a backpacker and apply that to what we're doing in the food business, and that led me to begin to look around to try to learn and understand, how does this food system operate? What parts do I want to participate in? What parts do I not want to participate in? And take that information that I'm learning and share that with other people. So Chefs Collaborative was an organization of chefs who were on similar journeys with me to more deeply understand our food system and the choices that we're making, or the choices that we have, the options that we have to us, and how do we communicate that to diners so that they're part of that decision making and have that awareness themselves. So that's been my journey as a restaurant owner, as a chef, as a communicator of the ideas about what impact does food have on our planet.
So as a chef, as an owner, as a change maker, and you've been around for a little while, I think I might say,
Mm-hmm.
do you see that the role of the chef in the area of changing food systems, has that evolved? Is it different today than what it was 10 years ago? Or is it still very, very similar?
Well, one of the things that's changed in the last 25 years is that the issues, or the climate issue, is more dire than it was. So that the process, the learning process, the ways of finding how to make gradual change, those things haven't changed, but the importance of it, the necessity of it, and with that, at times, kind of the pessimism, because it feels like such a bigger problem than it was 25 years ago, or our awareness of what it was 25 years ago can make it feel like a more daunting process. And but I think that again, that chefs still are uniquely positioned, as they were 25 years ago, to speak to these issues as arbiters of taste. That's why people come to our restaurants, because not only do we know how to cook well, but we know how to choose well. And choosing well is not just about what's the sweetest or what's the most flavorful, but understanding that underneath that great taste comes from good environmental practices and good labor practices, and that's all part of the equation.
Thank you for sharing those thoughts, Peter. I want to go back to Julie. And I think your words, you're in the middle of the beast these days. Could you speak a little bit more about from what changes in the broader food system is it that you're trying to pursue through Oatley? And how do you show up as ultimately as a director of sustainability in a purpose-driven organization like Oatley?
Yeah, absolutely. So Oatly, I think folks know, we're a company that makes only oat milk-based products, whether that's liquid milk or other things like frozen desserts, yogurts, et cetera, in North America. Global company based in Sweden. We've been around for about 35 years, although we've been in the North American market just for about 4 or 5. But, the company was founded to be mission-driven. We exist basically to make it easier for people to eat better diets and to live healthier lives, while at the same time not recklessly taxing the planet's resources. We do that through oats. We do that deliberately, and we can talk, if you want, about why oats would be a good choice of that. But I think the key thing is that we're trying to make it delicious and easy for people to switch to plant-based foods that are made with a planetary conscience. And in doing that switch and in educating people about what that switch entails, which is delicious, we're helping people in their daily food and beverage, decisions, what they're going to eat and drink. We're helping those people make the connection between what they choose and how they are impacting the planet. So in essence, what we're trying to do is sort of say, you are all change makers, and you make that change on a daily basis by the choices that you make about what you eat and drink. Collectively, our aspiration is that in doing that, we are accelerating a movement that is the collective mass of people towards a more plant-based future, which, as I don't need to stress in this forum, has beneficial planetary health consequences and human health consequences. And the ultimate goal that we have is really having a measurable, meaning in a large scale impact, positive impact, both on the planet and on people's lives through those choices. So that is the change that Oatly is trying to drive. And when I said sort of getting into the belly of the beast, what I meant was we do that through what we sell. I mean, we do that, it's woven into the mission. It's not an add-on, it's not something extra we do because we're a responsible company. We do that through the very thing that we exist to create and to share with our consumers.
There's a button. How do
you were saying something really, really fascinating, and I was like, what is that?
You're on mute is probably the most sad element over the last year or so. Having said that, how does a company like Oatly ultimately prioritize these different broader aspirations? Because it might be from a sustainability perspective, it might be social equity, DEI. There's probably more that your organization wants to achieve than it has capacity for. So what is ultimately helping you in prioritizing or making the trade-off decisions?
Sure. I mean, we're definitely focused on sustainability in all of its aspects. That's both environmental and social. I think we make that decision by looking at what is the most material to our business. So as an oat milk company, for example, we know because we have looked and done the analysis that the biggest impact that we make on the planet comes from our ingredients. Those are largely agricultural as well as our packaging ingredients. So we focus, and it means that I focus a lot of my time on that. So for example, when we talk about a food system shift, what we're talking about is getting to a point where 100% of our strategic materials, meaning the most important things that go into our products, are sourced sustainably. Then being very, very clear about what do we mean by sustainable, because that's a word that has come to mean a lot of things to a lot of different people. And then really tracking that. And anyone who's read Oatly's sustainability report can see, we're quite transparent about the things we do well, the places where maybe we didn't meet our own, goals, what we're going to do to make that better. But, largely it falls into three sort of, arenas. One is ingredients and sourcing, making sure that that's the most sustainable possible. One is the factory footprint. And as Oatly expands as a company, we are building more factories around the world. We are building those to what we call future factory specifications, which have a set of standards around the footprint that has to do with energy use, water, waste, et cetera. And then the third pillar really is about this movement acceleration, which is about both, me having conversations with forums like this. There's a lot of internal education inside the company where my role as the sustainability director is really to empower everyone else who works at the company to make sustainability informed choices in their day-to-day business decisions. So those are the three pillars. I mean, I know it could sound like a laundry list, but it's, sourcing, factories, and then thought leadership, both internally and externally to the company. That's how we prioritize.
And then maybe a trickier question. You went public a couple of months ago.
Uh-huh.
You now have one more set of stakeholders to deal with, the shareholders. How do you ultimately sell to shareholders that your focus on sustainability is the right focus?
Yeah, I mean, I think the answer to that question is we hit it head on, right? I mean, when we filed our papers, we talked a lot about the climate crisis and about the fact that our company is a response to the climate crisis. So, like I said, we sort of hit that head on. And when we decided to do the public offering, that was really about accessing resources to support this growth. So I would say it doesn't change really anything that I do in terms of what we're trying to achieve in sustainability. And in fact, I know that being a public company tends to come with more scrutiny of one's ESG performance. And I think we welcome that scrutiny. Like we're a sort of noisy company, right? And we like to push the envelope, and we like to, to really sort of poke at things and say, hey, we're doing this. What about the rest of you? But I think the important link between going public and the sustainability aspiration of the company really is around growth. And that might sound a bit counterintuitive, but the idea is we want to access more financial resources to support growth. And growth is part of that impact, because we're trying to reach as many customers as possible and get them to make the switch away from dairy, which has a much bigger environmental impact on the planet, and towards oats. So the more we grow, the more that net kind of benefit comes. And that is the business proposition basically of Oatly. And we were very explicit about that when we went public and said quite clearly, like, this is what we're trying to do. We do want to grow like this, because as we grow, that switch becomes more and more impactful in the positive direction.
About your story, Julie, is ultimately your theory of change. It's very, very clear what you want to achieve. There's a path, and you're on that path. Let's go maybe back to Peter. So Peter, if I would categorize you, you're a chef owner, and you were to an extent in control of your own destiny. As the owner, you could make decisions.
Right.
Not all chefs out there ultimately have that luxury burden. I'm not so sure how I would describe that. But what are your thoughts on if you are employed as a chef by somebody else, and that you're working in maybe a little bit more constrained environment?
Sure.
What is the role of a chef these days as it relates to making a positive change in the world of food?
Well, I think the first thing that everybody, wherever they are in the hierarchy of an organization, should remember and try to take on for themselves is that anybody can be a leader from wherever they are, and that a good company is going to have open ears to hearing those voices from wherever they are, and so that the perspective of the least skilled and lowest paid person in my restaurant was always still valued, because from where they stood, that's how the world looks. And so if you listen, there's something to be learned in that. And so both, that's our responsibility as leaders to listen wherever the information is coming from, but also that we can be leaders from wherever we are, even though we're not necessarily at the top. So what can chefs do? Well, again, I think that there's a place where chefs have the responsibility not just to be good cooks and have the skill set of producing the food that they're making or write the menus or whatever, but they also have to understand the structures and the landscape in which we're operating. That is, what does ag look like, or food production look like in this country? What's good about it? What's bad about it? What do we want to participate in or not? And what structures are that, again, we enter a business, it's someone else's business. We can't necessarily revolutionize it, turn it over overnight, but we also have to be aware of what does need to change. And in one way that things have changed dramatically in certain respects from where we were as a chef community, Chefs Collaborative chef community 25 years ago, is that our focus was largely on food production, environmental issues, and we weren't really looking at what did it mean to work in our kitchens, what were the working conditions like. And now people are sort of raising those issues. It's important to point the spotlight into our own houses and say, okay, we're bringing great products in, but what does it mean to actually work here as a company? And so if one of the things that we learned from our elders, from scientists, from people who were more advanced in thinking about all these issues, was this whole idea about externalized costs, right? That what is the real cost of food, and why is certain food cheap, and how does it get to be cheap? And part of that is that the costs are externalized. They're passed along to taxpayers, they're passed along to future generations. We've legalized destruction of the planet in certain respects. Those are all ways to make cheap food and externalize the cost. And so that we as chefs then said, we're committed to sharing with our diners, making these choices that we're going to pay closer to the real cost of food production. And people were like, okay, I'm happy to pay more for dried beans because of how they're grown, because of what I now understand about soil health and water retention and issues like that. Well, we're now in a place where it's important for us to say, in our houses, we no longer want to externalize the labor cost. And so that we can kind of bring our diners along, bring our community in the restaurant, whether that's our employers or our coworkers, front and back of the house, to understand that the pandemic taught us a tremendous amount about where we both have flexibility and where we have brittleness in our businesses. And this is a time that we can respond and incorporate some of those ideas into our businesses going forward. So again, just back to the environmental part, we acclimated our diners to be comfortable with paying what we think is the real cost of food. Now we have to acclimatize them to be comfortable paying more for dinner, because this is the real cost of having a flexible, healthy work staff, a group of employees who aren't stigmatized because they call in sick. We've realized that that's a good thing, a healthy community positive attribute, to call in sick instead of going in and then spreading your disease throughout the community. So chefs can, even though they're not the owners making the final decisions, articulating these kinds of ideas to the community, whoever's listening, whether it's peerful conversations or conversations in management meetings. These are ideas that we need to continue to help people think about, and so that they shift the practices of the business from wherever we are.
Thanks for that, Peter. I have a reflection and a follow-up question for you. It feels to me that you're much closer than I am, that being a chef in today's environment is probably a harder role than ever before. It's the world we live in as of today, maybe a labor shortage. It's just really, really hard to do your job really, really well. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, I think it feels to me that society has higher expectations about the role of the chef. And we believe that they are these magical change makers because they're involved in food. So one is, from what are your thoughts on, are the expectations just unrealistically high? And my second question is, what are, from your perspective, the sources or the groups where chefs can get their information from? Because even if they have a platform and the ability to change, where do you learn what needs to change and what are ultimately better solutions than maybe what we're doing as of today?
Right. Well, those are tough questions, Michael, but thank you for asking them. I do think that it is an even tougher, coming out of the pandemic, it is an incredibly tough moment for restaurant operators. And thank goodness for the federal help that went to everybody, whether that was through unemployment or PPP, all the different programs, SBA. They're largely small businesses. They don't get the kind of big bailouts that auto companies and airlines and things like that get, but they are such a critical part of our economy. And we we needed that money, we needed that support. And so, but now going forward, as you said, among other things, in this moment, people are having terrible labor shortages. Part of that, not to get into it, but because some people were saying, well, that's because everybody wants to stay on unemployment and not go back to work. I don't really buy that. But part of what it came out of it was the exposure that this is a tough business to work in, and maybe there are other ways to make a living or nicer environments to be in. And so that's on us. That's on restaurateurs to look at their businesses and figure out how to, it's not just attractive in the way of offering bonuses to come work for me, but how do we make the culture of the restaurant world still a positive place to work, an attractive place to work. And it's a tough business. The margins are small. And so people are, particularly coming out of the pandemic, then the tendency to squeeze again is hard to resist or understandable, to buy cheaper food or to try and pay somebody a little bit less because you're trying to just get your head above water from what the last year and a half has been. That's the short view, and I understand it. But really where we need to go in the long range is to say, I have an idea about a culture that is going to make working in a restaurant more attractive, a more desirable place to be in a way that people can progress, move their lives forward, or feel valued. And so some of that is about saying that we're gonna create healthy work environments that have higher goals than just turning a profit, that they are about global change, because we look around, we know what this last year or 2 years has collapsed into, all these critical issues that stressed a lot of people, stressed a lot of environments. And the only way that we're going to shift that is if we as business operators, in the same way that Julie's talking about, that her company is trying to shift that framework for all of us. And even a small restaurant can take on that role. And as I said, we did that in our small restaurant by saying, you're coming to us because we're creative, artistic, innovative cooks. And so we've educated ourselves about these wonderful ingredients, and these ingredients are about global change. Ultimately, they're about global change. Join me, not just by enjoying dinner, but by changing your eating habits when you go home as well. Because I've told you, I've taught you, I've brought you along to go, these are good choices to make.
Can I just interject for one second? I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to step on you, Peter, but just to say, this issue of employee culture and sort of internal culture extends, of course, also to food businesses. And I couldn't agree more, Peter, with what you're saying, just about, we're not just there to serve customers sort of delicious meals. I mean, Oatly exists to serve its customers delicious meals and to create a workplace where people feel safe. Particularly, we work in factory settings, right? We have factory workers. We actually built and opened a factory during COVID. And I have to say, as someone relatively new to the company, I mean, the safety protocols and the respect for employees and the education of employees around safety and around feeling comfortable and safe to say, this is what I need, this is what I need for my family, this is what I need for work-life balance. The investment in employees and the education and empowerment of employees to see themselves as change makers is a huge part of the culture. And I think, therefore, it is a huge part of success. And I think that model extends both to restaurants and to food companies and probably to every other company, but I can only speak for mine.
Do you think that has anything to do with the fact that it's a European-based company?
I mean, that's hard for me to say. I'm going to say no. I mean, I do think the Swedish model does come with certain, attention to benefits and attention to leave. And I certainly think as a corporation, those are part of the values. But, I work directly for the North American business. And I got to say, I mean, the leadership here in this market has just, every single time we have a conversation, has led with, how is everybody doing? Do you feel safe? What do we need to do for our teams? How is everyone handling the burden of remote work? What's the level of burnout? What can we do? And that's coming from the leadership that I work with every day, which is the American leadership. So I would say yes, and is my answer.
Right. Good. Yeah, I mean, the restaurant business, you know, the burnout question, and of course goes back to my saying that I was a recovering restaurateur. You know, that model is almost romanticized and lauded in the restaurant business or in the traditional high-end haute cuisine kinds of places. They burn out cooks. They churn through them and work them as hard as they can, and say, well, this is a good learning environment for you, and that's what you need to put on your resume to have been here and move forward. I think that, you know, that needs to die in the restaurant world. We really need to talk about being in the belly of the beast. We need to kill that beast because I don't care how good, how famous, how pristine all those plates are that are coming out in that restaurant. That's not the culture that's going to take us forward and make people be proud to continue to be in the restaurant business, or you know, it is kind of called the hospitality business. And to have a boss, a chef who's inhospitable is completely in conflict. And then with what we're saying we're doing in the front facing part of our business. So we got some work to do.
Let's go back to Julie. So Julie, you probably are one of the very few who have worked in so many different sectors. Government, the NGO sector, now in the commercial sector as well. Is when you think about the changes we aspire to see happen in the food system, do you believe that one specific group is more equipped or better equipped to drive those changes than others, or is it all of us and more? What are your thoughts about who can actually play the biggest role going forward?
Yeah, I mean, my first instinct as I was hearing you ask the question was to say, well, I'm a systems thinker, and this is a complex, you know, the global food system, of course, I think is one of the most complex and perhaps intractable systems that I can think of. So I want to say, oh, it's everybody. And, you know, it's got to be and the buyers and the government policies that incentivize, you know, why are some foods more expensive than others, and companies and consumers. That's not the most satisfying answer. So I think I will modify my answer by saying, obviously I do think everybody has to play a role. As I mentioned before, you know, one of my reasons to come to a company was my sense that, you know, I think government policy, which I worked on for a number of years, is really essential. And certainly there are changes that need to be made in the way that agriculture is structured in this country and globally in terms of what is supported, commoditized, subsidized, et cetera. I do think that, you know, I was reflecting in my mind a little bit when you were speaking with Peter about, you know, where do chefs get their information? When I worked at the nonprofit Wildlife Conservation Society, one of the things that we did was to take culinary expeditions with chefs. So at that time I was working in Latin America in the tropics, and our mission as an organization in the nonprofit was to support conservation and to support community-based conservation, mostly by indigenous communities who were stewarding and conserving really important biodiversity. And one of the methods we used was to bring chefs who were interested in interpreting indigenous and autochthonous ingredients for their urban clientele. We brought them to be educated and to exchange. Really, it was like a cultural exchange inside their own country to learn about that and to sort of broker supply chains, which benefited economically folks on the ground. And then they were able to come back and be, as Peter was saying, like interpreters of that and sort of influencers around, you know, what's there. So I think there's that education space that nonprofits play. But at the end of the day, as I sort of alluded to, I mean, the reason I came to a company is because I do feel like economics is the primary driver. And I think that humans as consumers is the primary driver. And so I guess I would say, I feel like companies that sell goods kind of have a responsibility to be mission driven with their goods. And I think that the people spending their money, i.e. consumers, have a responsibility to ask for goods that reflect their values. So I'm going to go with, yes, it's a system, and the buyer-seller relationship, I think, has a really, really important and influential role to play there.
Mm-hmm.
You're on mute, Michael.
As we have all been around for a little while,
Yeah.
and we might have younger audience members amongst us as well, could you share just one element where you say, I wish from a change management perspective then, what I know now? And for example, I can say, just thinking that with more information, people will come along, that is a change management theory that I think doesn't really work really, really well. So you have to engage people not just with the mind, but with the heart as well. But based on your experience, Peter and Julie, what are some of these two learnings that you have as well? Is that going back a number of years ago, I wish I would have known then what I know now?
I mean, I have two thoughts, and then Peter, you can collect your thoughts. I mean, okay, for me personally, one, I wish I knew how to read a P&L statement a lot earlier in my career. I think that would have been really useful. Meaning, I think that people who want to get educated around sustainability or sort of be environmental studies type people or kind of work in environment also are probably would benefit if they took a real hard grounding in business. I think that that's really fundamental sort of training that I wish I'd kind of figured out earlier. And I think the second thing that I would say that I figured out like relatively early in my career, but I'm very grateful that I have figured out and used is getting people to do things that go against their pleasurable interests is really hard. And so to the extent that you can lead with pleasure, with enjoyment, with deliciousness, with something that feels really positive, as opposed to, oh, do this for the planet, even though it's a massive sacrifice, is always going to be an easier lift. So if we can build more companies and more products and more models around that incentive, I mean, I'm not a psychologist or a behavioral economist, but it seems to me that that's true. I feel like that would be a more winning proposition.
Peter.
Yeah. Well, let's see. I mean, one of the things I think that always we were trying to find that balance between how to bring people along and still meet them where they were. And I think that there were times where menus still were a little challenging for people. Particularly, I was interested in kind of sharing cultural ideas, and so we used lots of foreign terms on the menus that were exciting to me, but were threatening to people, not realizing what it was. And so that finding that balance was I always wanted to say, well, this is what I'm doing, this is my journey, as opposed to holding the hand of my diner and bringing them along with me. So we tweaked it. I learned about it, but I still think that maybe I should have, I could have started thinking about them better earlier in the process.
Got it. Katie.
Yeah, thank you all so much. Oh my gosh, this has been so inspirational and such an amazing panel to almost end on. We're not quite done with the summit, and I just wanted to pop in for a couple logistical reminders. We're going into our last networking session. So again, I know you're all pros. This is the end of day 3, but for the networking panel or the networking opportunity, your icebreaker for today is, what is your one big idea for selling more sustainable dishes to consumers? So feel free to join the networking tab there and have chance encounters with colleagues and chat about that or whatever conversations come up. You can also join the Innovation Hub and see our amazing culinary demos and presentations continue in there, or you can join Peter and I for a Meet the Author as we continue some of this conversation a bit further, and I'll put the link for the Meet the Author in the chat here. And now back to our panel to wrap things up with a top takeaway from this session, which I know will be hard because it's been an amazing session. But maybe Michael, if you want to start.
Yeah. So when I think about the broader world of change, it can feel really, really overwhelming. It feels it's never enough. Everybody has a perspective. So my personal perspective is, 1, do something, and 2, celebrate success. Celebrate those who are trying and just help them to come along. And I think with those 2 easy steps, it's always amazing to see how much change can ultimately happen. Those would be my 2 key takeaways. Julie, what about yours?
Really agree with you with this idea. You know, the crisis, we've known about this crisis for a really long time about what's going on with the planet and people's health. So it's not like we don't have the diagnosis, but I think that people have been maybe searching for perfect solutions, and we just have to like get in there and do what we can. So I think, you know, my takeaway is, you know, I work for a company who's sees itself as a sustainability company trying to change the planet and people for the better. And we happen to do that through making oat milk products. So whoever is out there wanting to be a change maker, just like figure out what change you're trying to make in the world and then build a product or service around delivering that. Your tool can be something else. It's not going to be oat milk, but kind of in the world of everything that needs to get fixed on this planet, figure out what you're passionate about, educate yourself enough on that so that you know you can do something about it, and then build a business or build an effort, if you're a chef, restaurateur, business owner, or whatever, that gets that done through whatever tool delights you. That's kind of my takeaway from what we're all saying. It's like, we can all do this. We just have to kind of re-envision like our purpose for being and flip it around so that the tool is one thing and the mission is the other.
Yep. Last but not least, Peter.
Yeah, you know, I think one of the things that's important to remember in all of this is that as overwhelming as all the information may be for young people coming into this business and or trying to figure out what are the challenges, where are the problems, that we're all on this process of learning, and that anywhere that you put your toe into the water to begin studying and better understanding the landscape is a good place to begin. My journey of 40 years in the business has been about learning from people who had more wisdom than me, whether they were scientists or mentor chefs, but we can begin anywhere and not feel bad about the level of information that we have if we do it with care and the desire to keep learning and growing. That's a very important place. Otherwise, you kind of collapse and go, I can't deal with it. I'm just gonna, play a video game or watch a movie. But this process is accretion, and like geology, that accretion ultimately will build something much larger and much bigger that then we can do something with.
So well said, Peter. With that, thank you, Julie and Peter. Back to you, Katie.
Yeah, thank you all so much. Thank you, Michael and Julie, for joining us. And Peter, I'll see you in the Meet the Author. For those of you who would like to join us there, the link is in the chat. Please click there, and we'll see you in a couple minutes. So take care for now, and we hope to either see you in the next booth or next year at Menus of Change in Hyde Park. Take care.
Thanks very much. Bye, everybody.
Bye, Julie. Bye, Michael.
Bye.